All right, so today we're diving deep into generative AI and specifically how it's impacting the world of finance. We've got a ton of research here, reports, analyses, all about how this tech is changing the game for banks and really how it's impacting, the customer experience and everything in between.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how generative AI is not just automating things in finance, but sort of creating these new ways of doing things. Like, we're going to explore all of that today.
Yeah, so first off, I think it would be helpful to define what makes generative AI different from the AI we hear about, day in and day out. What makes it special?
Well, I think a good way to think about it is like traditional AI might help a bank flag a fraudulent transaction, right? But generative AI can actually analyze patterns and data to predict and simulate entirely new fraud scenarios. So it's kind of like instead of just reacting, it's being proactive.
Wow, that's a big difference. And it seems like this ability to analyze data and generate predictions has implications for a bunch of stuff. I mean, we're looking at this report here and it's talking about risk management, credit approvals, regulatory compliance, even customer experience and personalization.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. It's all about simulating and predicting, which is super important in finance. Trust and accuracy are key there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into some specific examples. One thing that really jumped out at me was how generative AI is being used in credit scoring. So traditionally, credit decisions have been based on, a pretty limited set of data points. But it looks like this tech is expanding the scope dramatically.
Yeah, it's like creating a much more holistic view of someone's entire financial situation. So generative AI can take into account these unconventional data sources, things like spending habits, income stability, even utility bill payments. So it's a much more well-rounded assessment of creditworthiness.
So it's not just a credit score in isolation. It's like the whole picture of someone's financial life. And that seems like it could be really beneficial for people who maybe don't have a traditional credit history, but are still financially responsible.
Exactly. It could make lending decisions more accurate, more efficient, and more inclusive.
All right, so we've got all this data analysis going on. And this article raises some concerns about data privacy and security when it comes to using this tech.
Right, and that's a really important point. I mean, these AI models need massive amounts of data to be effective. And that data often includes really sensitive customer information. So banks need to have those really strong security measures in place. Think encryption access controls regular audits to protect that data from breaches and misuse.
It's like the more data you're collecting and analyzing, the higher the stakes are for security. And it's not just about protecting the data itself, right? This report is talking about the importance of making sure that these AI models are actually fair and unbiased. What's being done to address that?
Well, that's where really careful model development and testing are super important. Data scientists need to be very intentional about the data used to train these models. They want to make sure it's diverse and representative to prevent bias from seeping into the system.
So it's not just building the most accurate model, but the most ethical model. Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But even if you address those concerns, I imagine that integrating these, really advanced AI systems with the older systems that banks already have must be pretty complex.
Yeah, you're right. It can be. A lot of banks still rely on those legacy systems that just weren't designed for something as complex as generative AI. So integration can be really costly, time-consuming. You need infrastructure upgrades, data migration, employee training. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So that's even before we get to this whole black box problem we hear about with AI. How do you ensure transparency and explainability with these complex models?
Yeah. Well, one approach that's gaining traction is something called hybrid AI architectures. And these combine the power of large language models with more transparent AI methods, like think decision trees or rule-based systems.
So it's like the best of both worlds. You get the deep analysis, but also the transparency of a more traditional system?
Exactly. So the large language model analyzes all this data, identifies patterns, and then those insights are fed into a more transparent system that gives you a clear explanation of how a decision was made.
But could you give us a concrete example of how this might work, like in a real-world scenario?
Sure. Let's say you're applying for a mortgage, and the AI analyzes all your data and denies your application. A hybrid system could then show you exactly which factors led to that decision. Maybe your debt-to-income ratio was a little high, or there were a few issues on your credit history. So you understand the reasoning behind it, and you can try to address those issues.
Wow, that's super helpful. Instead of just getting a yes or no, you get a clear explanation of the logic.
Exactly. And that transparency is crucial for building trust and using AI responsibly in finance.
Okay, so we've talked about some exciting possibilities and some potential pitfalls. But it seems like banks are starting to figure out how to implement this tech responsibly.
Yeah, I think they're making progress, but it's definitely an ongoing process. And as AI keeps evolving, the approaches to governance, security, and ethical considerations will have to evolve too.
So where do you see this technology heading in the future?
Oh, things are going to get even more interesting.
Yeah.
We're just scratching the surface of what's possible with generative AI, and the impact on finance is only going to grow in the coming years.
Okay, well, let's dive into some of those future possibilities then.
Sounds good. I think one area that's really exciting is personalized financial advice. Imagine an AI system that analyzes your spending habits, income, and goals, and it creates this like custom financial plan just for you.
Oh, wow, that sounds amazing. I mean, I'm terrible with budgeting, so
Yeah.
something like that would be a dream come true. But would people actually trust an AI to give them financial advice?
Well, yeah, trust is super important, and banks would need to be really transparent about how these systems work. But imagine, being able to ask like, hey, AI, what's the best way to save for a down payment on a house? And you actually get a helpful, personalized response based on like your specific situation.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. So AI isn't just about helping us manage our own money. It can also change the way institutions handle risk. We touched on this earlier, but let's dive a little deeper into how generative AI is impacting risk management.
Yeah, it's about going beyond just analyzing historical data. Generative AI can actually create these simulations of, market events. Like imagine sudden interest rate hikes or even like a flash crash. So it helps banks identify vulnerabilities and prepare for different scenarios.
So it's like a stress test for the whole financial system, but powered by AI.
Exactly. And that kind of scenario planning can help banks make more informed decisions,
Oh, yeah.
Potentially prevent losses and strengthen the whole system.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second and talk about another area where AI could really streamline things. Regulatory compliance. This is usually a super manual and time-consuming process.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And generative AI could potentially automate a ton of those tasks. Things like reviewing contracts, flagging potential violations, even generating reports. So compliance officers could focus on the more complex stuff.
So instead of teams of lawyers poring over documents, we could have AI doing a lot of that work. That sounds like a win-win for efficiency and accuracy.
Exactly. And it could even lead to cost savings for banks, which could ultimately benefit consumers.
Okay, let's move on to something that I know a lot of people are concerned about. Fraud detection. How can AI help us stay ahead of the bad guys?
Well, we talked about how generative AI can simulate different scenarios, and that applies to fraud as well. So banks can use AI to create simulations of, different fraud schemes, and that helps them identify weaknesses and develop better prevention strategies.
It's like a virtual training ground for fighting fraud.
Yeah. It is. And because generative AI can analyze tons of data in real time, it can also detect suspicious activity that might slip past those traditional security systems.
But we've also talked about the risk of false positives. Those legitimate transactions that get flagged as fraudulent. Could generative AI help reduce those as well?
Absolutely. It can learn each customer's unique spending habits. So it can tell the difference between genuine anomalies and those transactions that are unusual but still legitimate.
So fewer unnecessary blocks and a smoother experience for everyone. It seems like a big benefit of generative AI is this ability to personalize the banking experience, whether it's, customized financial advice, more accurate fraud detection, or even a smoother process for loan applications.
Yeah, you're right. Personalization is definitely a key area where AI is going to transform the industry.
Okay, let's talk about another aspect of personalization. Those AI-powered chatbots that everyone's talking about. I've got to admit, I'm a little skeptical. I've interacted with chatbots before, and they're often pretty clunky and unhelpful.
Oh, I totally get it. A lot of chatbots today are rule-based, so they can only respond to a limited set of questions. But imagine a chatbot powered by generative AI. It can understand natural language, respond to a wide range of requests, and it even learns from its interactions to become more helpful over time.
So instead of getting stuck in those frustrating loops, you could actually have a conversation with a chatbot, a conversation that's actually helpful.
Exactly. Like you could ask, what's the best way to save for a down payment on a house? And get a thoughtful, personalized response based on, your financial situation. These AI assistants could be available 24/7. They could answer questions, help with budgeting and financial planning.
Okay, that sounds pretty incredible. But wouldn't it take massive amounts of data to train a chatbot to be that good?
Yeah, it would require a lot of data, but the technology is getting there. Banks could train these chatbots on, huge data sets of customer interactions, things like transcripts from phone calls, emails, even social media conversations.
So the chatbot would basically learn from all those previous interactions that humans have had with the bank.
Yeah, exactly. And as it interacts with more customers and gets more feedback, it's going to keep learning and improving, so it becomes even more personalized and helpful over time.
Okay, this is all super exciting, but it's important to remember that we're still in the early stages of AI adoption in banking. There's still a lot of unknowns, and we're just starting to explore all the potential benefits and risks.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to approach this technology carefully and with a real commitment to responsible development and deployment. It's not just about the tech itself, but the ethical and societal implications.
And that brings us back to something we've talked about a few times, the importance of transparency, fairness, and human oversight in AI development.
Exactly. AI is a powerful tool, but it's not a replacement for human judgment
Right.
or empathy or creativity. It's about finding that balance between human and artificial intelligence to create a financial system that actually works for everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've looked at the exciting possibilities, the potential challenges, and the steps that are being taken to address those challenges.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, let's talk about the bigger picture. What are some of the broader trends and implications we should be thinking about as this technology continues to evolve?
Well, one trend that I find really interesting is the rise of decentralized finance, or DeFi. It's this movement to create a more open and accessible financial system. And it's powered by blockchain technology. And generative AI could play a big role in this.
So we're talking about a future where financial services aren't controlled by a few big institutions, but are more distributed.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a world where you can access financial services directly through a blockchain platform. You wouldn't need a bank account or go through those traditional intermediaries.
That would be a huge change, especially for people who are underserved by the current system.
Exactly. DeFi could open up access to financial services for millions of people. It could empower individuals and communities in ways that we haven't seen before.
That's a pretty incredible vision for the future.
Yeah.
But I also imagine that this kind of decentralized system would raise some questions about regulation and security.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Decentralized finance definitely presents some challenges, and regulators are going to need to adapt their rules and oversight to this new landscape. Ensuring the security and stability of these platforms is going to be crucial.
So it sounds like we're on the verge of a major transformation in the financial world. Generative AI is changing the way banks operate, the way we manage our money, and even the structure of the financial system itself.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be following all of this.
But with all this talk about innovation and disruption, it's easy to get caught up in the hype and overlook some of the potential downsides.
Yeah, that's true. It's important to remember that AI is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. We need to be mindful of things like job displacement, algorithmic bias, and even the concentration of power in the hands of a few tech companies.
So it's not just about embracing the latest technology. It's about using it responsibly and ethically to create a better future for everyone.
Exactly. We need to have these open and honest conversations about the benefits and the risks of AI. And we need to work together to make sure it's used to build a more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable financial system.
Okay, so let's get a little more specific here. What are some things that our listeners should be watching for as generative AI becomes more common in their financial lives?
Well, first, pay attention to how banks are communicating about AI. Are they being transparent about how they're using it? Do they give you control over your data and preferences?
So if they're being vague or secretive, that's a red flag.
Exactly. Trustworthy AI relies on openness and accountability.
Okay, what else?
Second, watch for changes in the customer experience. Are chatbots getting more helpful and responsive? Are loan approvals faster and easier? Are you getting more personalized advice? Those improvements could be signs that AI is being implemented well.
And if things are getting more complicated or confusing, maybe that's a sign that the AI isn't quite there yet.
Yeah, it's all about finding the balance between innovation and making things easy to use.
So be an informed consumer, ask questions, demand transparency. What's the third thing?
Keep an eye on the broader financial landscape. Are there new AI-powered products and services popping up? Are there debates happening about the ethics of AI in finance? Stay informed about all of that to help you navigate this changing world.
It's like anything new, a mix of excitement and caution. But knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about something that I know a lot of people are thinking about. If AI gets this good at finance, what happens to all the jobs?
Yeah, it's understandable that people are worried about being replaced by robots, especially in a field like finance that seems ripe for automation.
So are we all going to be out of work soon?
I don't think so. I mean, historically, technological advancements have often led to new types of jobs, not just job losses. Think about the internet. It disrupted a lot of industries, but it also created countless new opportunities.
So it's more about how AI will change the skills that are needed in the financial industry.
Exactly, the key is going to be adaptability and lifelong learning. Those jobs that involve a lot of repetitive tasks are more likely to be automated. But the roles that require critical thinking, creativity, human interaction, those will become even more valuable.
So we'll need financial advisors who can explain complex AI recommendations, data ethicists who make sure these systems are fair, cybersecurity experts who protect our data.
Exactly. The future of finance belongs to those who can use AI effectively, but also maintain that human touch.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty comprehensive picture of generative AI in banking. We've looked at the potential, the challenges, the steps being taken to mitigate those challenges.
Now let's move on to the most exciting part. What does the future hold for this transformative technology?
Yes, let's look into the crystal ball. What are some bold predictions for the future of generative AI in banking?
You know, we've talked about some of the big challenges with AI, like that black box problem. It's tough to understand how these complex models are actually making decisions.
Right, and that lack of transparency is a big deal, especially in finance, where trust is so important.
Yeah, exactly. So hybrid AI architectures are trying to solve that problem. By combining those powerful large language models with more transparent methods like decision trees or rule-based systems.
So it's kind of like taking the strengths of both approaches,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The large language model can analyze tons of data and find patterns. But then those insights are fed into a system that can actually explain how the decision was made.
Can you give us an example of how this would work in banking?
Sure. Imagine a bank is using an AI to look at loan applications. The large language model would analyze the person's financial history, credit score, income, all that stuff, to figure out if they're a good candidate for a loan.
But we still wouldn't know how the AI actually came to that conclusion, right?
Right, that's where the hybrid architecture comes in. So the output from the large language model goes into something like a decision tree, which is basically a visual representation of a bunch of if-then rules.
So the decision tree would break down the AI's logic into steps that we can actually understand.
Exactly. It might show that if the applicant's credit score is above a certain number, and their debt-to-income ratio is below a certain level, then they're likely to be approved.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and that transparency is really important for building trust with customers.
Okay, so hybrid architectures are one way to deal with the transparency issue. What are some other things that banks are doing to make sure they're using AI responsibly?
Well, one thing is to develop AI models that are specifically designed for explainability. So from the very beginning, they're built with transparency in mind.
So instead of trying to add transparency later, you're building it in from the start.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different techniques for doing this, like using simpler algorithms or making sure the model includes features that humans can understand.
That sounds pretty cool. What else are banks doing?
Another big focus is data governance. We've talked about how important the data is for training these AI models. So banks are really investing in data quality, security, and privacy to make sure the data is accurate, unbiased, and protected.
So it's not just about having a lot of data, it's about having good data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need a whole system for managing that data responsibly.
Okay, so we've got hybrid AI architectures, explainable models, and good data governance. Anything else?
Yeah, another important piece is ongoing monitoring and evaluation. AI models aren't static. They change over time as they get exposed to new data. So banks need to keep an eye on how their models are performing and look for any signs of bias or other issues.
So it's like giving the AI a regular checkup.
Exactly. And if they find any problems, they need to be ready to retrain the models.
Okay, so it seems like banks are taking this seriously. But what about the regulators? Are they keeping up with all this new technology?
Well, they're definitely playing catch up, but they are starting to understand how important AI governance is in finance. We're seeing new regulations and guidelines around data privacy, algorithmic bias, and explainability.
So it sounds like it's a team effort between banks, regulators, and even consumers to make sure that AI is used ethically in banking.
Yeah, it's all about working together to make sure everyone benefits.
Well, this has been a really fascinating look at generative AI in banking. We've talked about the potential, the challenges, and the ways to make sure this technology is used responsibly.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see how this all plays out.
As we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a sense of both the incredible opportunities and the responsibility we all have in shaping this future.
It's up to all of us to stay informed and engaged, and to make sure that this technology is used for good.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay curious.